Greetings, Zimbabwe, Africa, and the world. Welcome to In Conversation with Trevor, brought to you by Titan Law. I go beyond the headlines and beyond the sensational. Today, I'm in conversation with Zimbabwean celebrated comedian and entrepreneur, Carl Joshua Ncube. Carl Joshua Ncube, welcome to In Conversation with Trevor.
Ncube, thank you.
I think you have to tell people that we're not related.
Yes, so
that this is not nepotism.
Yeah, people think every Ncube is related, but if you look at the phone book, it's not even possible. Like for me and you, our Ncubes don't have landlines. So we come from that tribe.
So we're not even there.
We're not even related. So we just decide like at each funeral when we're going to meet each other next. If no one dies, then it's just a reunion.
We never see each other. Carl, you've had an amazing life. Comedy Central Africa has named you one of Zimbabwe's finest comedians. CNN African Voices has called you the new face of Zimbabwean comedy. What does this mean to you?
Wow. You know, it's a great validation for the work that went into comedy. Like just yesterday, we're just going through what it took to do a comedy show. And I'm celebrating 10 years.
Congratulations.
So we had police reports, police clearance that we had to do. We had censorship. In fact, there was one document where the police said he never paid for his previous bill. We are not approving it. Only to realize they meant Edgar Langerfeld. So they thought every comedian was the same person. So, you know, being able to have exported comedy has been a great thing because now it also shows that I like the quote by CNN to say the new face of Zimbabwean comedy. But I think I've become more the older face. And there's much newer faces that are traveling the world and doing comedy. And it's just
from Zimbabwe.
Amazing. Yeah, it's amazing to be part of.
What is?
So we've got Q Dube, who's in South Africa, Kuda Kwashe Rusike, who goes by George Kuda, Alfred Kainga, who's in the US. We also have Farhan Isat, and then who else? We've got Simba Kakora. It's quite a number. Troy Tesla. There's quite a number of.
So there's a good crop of Zimbabwean stand-up comedians out there.
Yeah, absolutely. Comedy is one thing that we've successfully exported.
That's interesting.
And it's growing, and it's almost a validation as well of what is happening in Zimbabwe. So for example, we always say, do they allow you to do comedy in Zimbabwe? And that's usually the barometer that they use. And you know, lately it's been a lot better to do comedy. I mean, I've been on the run for a year, so it's nice.
And you are a TED fellow, and the very influential Quads magazine publication has put you on their list of the most innovative Africans. Again, amazing accolades for you.
Yeah, you know, innovation has always been one of the coolest things about being Zimbabwean. It comes from a difficult place, but that's what pushes us to do things very differently. I mean, we've had to do shows where there's no cash in the market, and so we've had to use maybe tech in order to get sponsorship to pay for SMSs, and the SMSs are used as tickets, and it's a complicated thing. But once you're explaining to people outside, they're like, oh my gosh, you guys don't just do comedy where people just walk in the door. It's like, no, it's not that
we
simple.
Do more than comedy.
Exactly.
We do more than comedy. The laughter is an amazing release. I mean, Lord Brown once said, always laugh when you can. It is cheap medicine. I mean, I love comedy because it makes me relax. It puts me in a good space. Does it have the same effect on you?
It's a little bit different. Comedians are very depressed people, and that's because a lot of the times we internalize. I think we're journalists first. We internalize everything that's happening in the world, absorb all that information. Then you have to find a way in which the regular person can understand this information without feeling as depressed as the news itself. So you have to find if something is happening, if there's poverty, hunger, if there's war. Imagine for a comedian, you have to absorb that, hide it, and then tell people an interesting thing about those things that make people laugh about it and then discuss later in a more sort of in an okay manner.
So when we experience you as being funny,
Yeah.
you actually internally not being funny. You're not laughing.
Yeah, you're dealing with some very difficult issues. For me, my comedy deals with race, deals with tribalism, for example. So it comes from very painful childhood experiences, but I have to communicate how I identify as being Zimbabwean. So a lot of it is very heavy. But that release, when you see people laugh, that's the payoff for the comedian in that moment. But then you have to go back to the issues again.
And Albert Hubbard once said, "Do not take life seriously. You'll never get out of it alive anywhere." Yeah. And reading your biography, at some point I stopped and said, "This guy's life is very funny. This can be real." Do you go through your life, saying to yourself, "You're a comedian. Your life needs to be funny. You need to." How do you go through life?
Yeah, so life has always, for me, been about perspective. So, let's look at Zimbabwe, for example. Right now, people are complaining about a lot of things, and they're quite justified. The power issues, broadband is expensive, the food issues that are happening. But you have to remember that when this country was colonized, there was no road, there was no internet, there was diseases that are unmentionable. Yet a certain group of people still came and saw an opportunity to take over land from the people that were currently residing in there, using any means, force or whatever it is. And so I look at this chapter also in Zimbabwe as the same thing. I look at it as a barren land with only opportunities that are available. So if there's no internet, then I believe that there's an opportunity for internet. If there's no publications, if there's say stifled sort of media in a way, then there is opportunity in there to engage and figure out a way forward. That's the new takeover, so to speak.
So you're looking at crisis presenting an opportunity.
Absolutely. I believe there's a few of us that have the ability and the responsibility. If you make an observation, you have an obligation. So I feel if you've seen an opportunity to be able to do some good, then you must resource everything to be able to do that for the many that will benefit. So comedy, for example, Zimbabwe was in a very fractured state for some time. And me coming into comedy was a tonic. It was deliberate to get an industry going, for people to have an outlet, escapism, to laugh at some of the problems that we had. In a big way, I believe it did contribute to people's maybe state of mind. Because if you look right now, Zimbabweans have a way of dealing with issues using comedy in a way that you've never seen any other country do before.
But sometimes I say to myself, that tendency to laugh at our problems has tended to overtake our ability to provide solutions for the problems, because we're always making fun of our problems. We're not taking our problems seriously as it were. What do you say about that?
I completely agree. I think when humor is a form of escapism and you don't know that's what you're doing, then it becomes a problem. It's almost like a psychotic condition. However, for me, I have an understanding that my humor comes from a place of fear. So while I was on the run, while I was afraid of people coming to my house, I used that to tell stories, but at the same time had a business model to be able to pay for it. So a lot of the times, if you don't know that you are in a form of escapism, then you're using that tool in an incorrect way.
So we could find ourselves in that escapism, using humor and paralyzed in a way.
Exactly, because you're meant to use the humor to come. It's therapy. So you come out of it, then you generate a solution. Because sometimes looking at your problem causes you to get very angry, then humor causes you to escape. So these are two complete parallels here. Somewhere in the middle, one has to come back to reality and say, okay, listen, let me just be cynical about this, but let me go back to solving an actual problem.
You've spoken about your childhood, troubled childhood and upbringing. Your father, Charles Ncube, was who's late now, was Ndebele. Your mother was Miriam Chaganda, Shona. Tell me about your upbringing and these two beautiful people who brought you to life.
Yeah, so they existed in a time that was difficult for both of them. They had to handle cultural differences. They had to handle quite a lot of different issues. Unfortunately, it never worked out for them. So when I was 5 is when my parents split up. But that's when I began to understand the cultures a lot more. As a result, because I'd have the perspective of my Shona relatives who would, have things to say for example, about my dad, and my dad's family would have things to say about my mom's side of the family. So I never found myself identifying with either being Shona or Ndebele. In fact, I grew up most of my life thinking I was colored, because I thought my my father was so light in complexion. We lived in Southwold, which is predominantly a colored area. So I grew up thinking I was colored, and then later on finding out I was black. So that already was a culture shock for me to deal with. But primarily, I saw it as a form of expression of communication, to be able to, in my comedy, you would see me make jokes about Shona people and make jokes about Ndebele people. And while people might describe me as being tribalist, if you watch my audiences, you will see people start to interact on a different level. Even when I talk about white people and black people, you find my audiences start to talk to each other and ask some real questions and real conversations.
Talk to me about what having a Shona mother and Ndebele father has done to you in terms of your outlook on issues like tribalism.
Yeah.
You do talk about the fact that the Shona part of your family would laugh at you and make funny jokes. The Ndebele part of your family. Speak to us about that.
Yeah, so a lot of what used to happen would be in the media. So, we grew up in a time where, on the news you're hearing about dissidents and so on. And so that was my nickname, actually. I was become dissident when I was, on that side of the family. And then when I'm in the Ndebele side of the family, then I'm, Imimi Murmashona, that kind of thing. For me, I couldn't understand. I was too young to understand exactly what was going on in the geopolitical sort of sphere. All I understood was that my cousins are being nasty to me, and my cousins are being nasty to me. And so one of the areas of escape for me was that when my parents were split up, is that I lived with a lot of different relatives. And so I only found my own spaces of just trying to disrupt within the space I was growing up in. Just find my own little thing that I would do that didn't require anyone. So I found myself only doing my own things, like fantasizing about having my first comic book. As early as, I think, the age 8, I wanted to have my own television station. And so I would look and watch the credits to see where my name was. If there was a person called Carl, if there's a person called Joshua, if there was a person. So that really formulated my idea of wanting to tell a different story. It's why at school I became editor of the school newspaper, that kind of thing, because I was very keen on telling a different story, which was to say, I'm also here. You're not paying attention to me. You keep talking about Shona, you're talking about Ndebele, but somewhere in there, you're forgetting that I also exist in this space.
Wow. And what has that done to your worldview of looking at Zimbabwe with these, with the Shona blood in you and Ndebele blood in you? What has that done to you?
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's just shown that there's not enough inclusion. Historically, Shona people have just been put into one group. They weren't actually Shona. They were different tribes or different dialects, and then just bunched up as one. And somehow Zimbabwe tries to understand itself by grouping people, by saying you're either this political party or that political party, but forgetting somewhere in between is either truth, solutions. That has nothing to do with, and that's why it was such a fractured country, because we're always trying to find a way of grouping. That's why when I was in Harare, I'd always want my Ndebele identity to be seen, because I wanted to be counted as, I'm Ndebele here, but when I'm in Bulawayo, it's the same thing. I wanted my,
Your Shona.
my Shona to come out. But I was lucky because my grandparents were the ones that really understood this very well. Like my grandmother named me Tinodawan, so I'm Carl Joshua Ncube. And my grandmother on my father's side would only call me Tinodawan on the Ndebele side. So they were very specific to say, I remember my mom would say, my grandfather would say, no, don't speak Ndebele. I don't want you to speak Ndebele. They must learn Shona. And the same used to happen on my grandmother's side.
So what do you do when Shona and Ndebele people, I'm using the terms in a general kind of way, when Shona and Ndebele people are fighting, for instance, over Gukurawundi, the fighting over tribal issues, where do you sit there?
Yeah, so I don't look at it as where do I sit, because for me, my experiences don't, the experiences I went through were slightly out of context. For example, I remembered hiding under a car with my father, and I don't know what that was about. I was so young. I remembered one time my father hiding under the train seat on a train and instructing me to not speak in Ndebele at all. So I had to speak Shona. So this issue around my identity was always like a hidden thing, but I couldn't understand why I had to hide who I was. Only when you grow up and then you understand all the issues that happened there, then you see, like, as a country, we need to start thinking about how to solve these issues. And one of them could be that this debate that's been going back and forth for years, politically and whatever, still needs to happen. But I also believe, like, as content producers, as influencers, we also have another role to be able to tell a new story about Zimbabwe. Because we've got a generation that doesn't understand. They need to understand historically. I think it's important to know the past, but only to understand the present so that we can chart a course for the future. Because right now, if we only have the discussions happening about the past and we're not addressing these two issues, we're still going to get other groups that are going to be marginalized, that are going to be left out of the conversation.
And then your mom and dad, first of all, separate, and then they divorce. What did that do to you?
Wow. Initially, it was heartbreaking, but watching television, I watched a lot of TV when I was young. So seeing this idea of a stepdad, stepmom, half brother, half sister excited me a lot, because it was just me and my brother initially. I just wanted to be able to tell the story and say, listen, I've got 2 moms and 2 dads, That was an exciting chapter for me, being able to see, I've got, on one side, I've got a sister and a brother. And then on the other side, I've got a sister and 2 brothers. And so they're not merged as a family. So I am the person unifying them. I go this side and we're 4. Then I go this side and then we're 5. Depends. My father also had other, but yeah, it's a story for another day. But it's exciting for me, because this idea of different types of family, it's also formulated who I call family now. I don't call people family according to blood now. Sometimes it's about our actual relationship. So I've been adopted by more people. I've got more fathers. I've got more mothers. It's just helped me to be able to cope with the world a lot more and be less insular.
When did you discover you were funny?
I think I was forced into it by my dad, to be honest. He was a comedian. And my dad always told jokes. And then we loved telling our dad's jokes. And then my dad would, it sounds bad, but he would take me to bars with him when we were young and ask me to tell his jokes to his friends. Some of them a little bit inappropriate because they involved my mother, because they just split up, and I think that was his avenue of escape. But very early on, I loved telling my dad's jokes. In fact, I wanted to manage my dad, but he was too afraid to do comedy. So I tested it out as a show, and then the press started writing about it, and that's how I became a comedian. But I had studied the business of comedy thoroughly for the sole purpose of promoting or managing my father.
When did you turn it into a business? When did you decide to turn it into your livelihood?
Right. We saw one time that me telling jokes at a function opened a lot more doors. It used to be very intimidating for people as a creative, walking into a room and having all these ideas. And so it was difficult for people to latch onto ideas I had, because they would think it came from a superiority sort of, I used to run an ad agency, so I was, head creative of that. So walking into a room, a lot of the times I get more animosity. But I found comedy was a very nice way of cutting through that ice. People looked at me as non-threatening, and then I could bring this package of everything else that I could do. So my wife and I we crafted a 15-year plan on exactly how we were going to do it. Who we were going to meet, what interviews we were going to do, how we were going to export comedy, how we were going to grow it. So that was in 2010 when I started.
Your wife, Nelsie.
Yeah, my wife, Nelsie. Yes.
So she's a big part of who you've become and your business. Talk to me about that.
Yeah, so one of the things that working as a creative, I've directed award ceremonies like NAMA. I've done a lot of, televised events. And so I've worked with artists a lot. And a few of the artists that were very successful were married, like they worked with their partner. And one of the things that we started at the beginning is we decided, listen, if we're not going to get along, let's not get along, but let's do it well. And we just told each other, whatever fight we have, it's not ending in divorce. And so that sort of got rid of.
Divorce is out of the question.
It's out of the question. So we are not going to get along. That's fine. We'll get back together again. Then we had to decide what was our daily habit. So the one thing that we say two things that we do. We always bath together, because it's very difficult to argue with a person, firstly, who's naked. And it's also difficult to argue with the person when you need them to wash your back. So it's a very difficult thing. So that's a habit that we've kept consistently for, as long as.
So you've never argued to the extent that you're not going to bath together?
No, it's not possible. It's not possible. We will still bath together. We still have to, it doesn't matter what happens. That's the one thing that's constant.
How do you put together your comedy material?
Mostly permission from my wife. But comedy, a lot just happens to me. I don't know why. If I bought a combi, for example, there's one time a guy walks in and he's carrying a chicken, which is not an abnormal thing in Africa. It's a chicken in a
live
combi,
chicken?
a live chicken. He's just carrying a chicken. It's in a plastic bag. And then I decide to look at the plastic bag and it reads chicken in. That's not so those kind of things happen to you generally. Then there's things that happen in your life, usually bad ones. I use this to try and deal with issues. So the death of my father is one that I use a lot in my comedy, where I talk about the fact that he died and I stole his jokes because he can't come back for royalties, because we don't have that provision according to the law. But those things help me, because when I travel, I always have to perform. I perform my dad's jokes in there, just in my mind, to know that he could have been exported. So it gives me that, that ability to be able to express myself that way. And
how much of this material is your lived experience, and how much of it is watching other people's experiences?
So in order to keep myself original, because when I started, I used to write about what I see. And then I realized everyone was seeing the same things. So you would see that, like Trevor, for example, and my jokes, and say basket mouth and so on, would be similar, because we'd all talk about a mother who would hit us with the slipper. We'd all talk about the same things. But when I started looking at the world from my perspective, the jokes have become more about my personal lived experiences as opposed to just my observation. So if I see someone do something, how did it make me feel? I interrogate that, and that's where the jokes will come from.
What's the worst joke you've ever told?
Worst joke I've ever told was in front of my parents, when I said my stepdad and I don't get along, but I realized it's because I look like my mom's ex.
Wow.
Yeah, so that's that's in my earlier days, not realizing that humor can have it's got terrible consequences.
What were the consequences of that joke?
For me, I don't think my parents said anything about it. I just feel like it was very disrespectful from my perspective. It wasn't worth the laughs that I got. In fact, I didn't even get many laughs, because audiences are also like that. Generally, they see themselves as part of the joke, so they internalize something that they don't like, and they'll look at it as though you have insulted them. And in our culture, with parents, you also have to find so I also learned how to do jokes on Robert Mugabe using that same formula, that it didn't matter what my feelings were. I had to find a way of making jokes not about him, the person, but what he did. So it would be different. Like if he fell, my question was, how come all the CIOs didn't try to catch him? Why were they trying to get other people's cameras? We knew that our head of state was getting on in age, but it wasn't insulting him. It would be maybe talking about another aspect as well.
The take me to you're on stage, and you crack this joke as a stand-up comedian, and people don't laugh.
Yeah.
Okay. What's your response?
So right now I'm going to spoil stand-up comedy for everyone, in that it is a very technical sort of craft. It's almost like writing a song. So when you write a song, you're trying to establish what they call a laugh ratio. So at a minimum, a comedian who's getting gigs that are paid is got a laugh ratio of about 4 laughs per minute. And so you're cracking you've got a punchline every 15 seconds. So the way a joke is set up is that there's a setup and then there's a punchline. So each punchline, you probably got 4 in a minute. Some comics push it to 6. Others who are really good go 9 for example. So sometimes when you've cracked a joke and someone doesn't laugh, you still have 3 more opportunities to do it in a minute without the audience noticing. If you end up doing these 4 or 5 and nobody laughs, then that joke has failed. And in comedy time, that's a lot of time. And the audience will notice, and sometimes it makes you change your plan, makes you change how your jokes are. But I always say, when you travel, the more you understand that relationship between you, your audience, the jokes, what's happening in those countries. Like I said, it's journalism. It's almost like you're telling the truth about something, but finding a way of, packaging it.
How do you recover from that on stage? We're watching you, we're expecting you to make us laugh, and you haven't made us laugh.
Right, so I will remember Nigeria, my first time in Nigeria, Lagos. I performed in Lagos, and they asked us to do 5 minutes as a teaser show. The main show was in Abuja. I killed it so bad that I was so good at it that the promoters were like, this guy he's the next big thing. So they made me headline. And to headline means performing after everybody. And so they put me on last, and the presenter comes on and says, all the way from Zimbabwe, guys, the guy you've been waiting for, Carl Joshua Ncube. I come out, and I just spoke for 15 minutes. Not a single bit of laughter, nothing. I just had to go through my entire set, and then I went off stage and I started crying. I wanted to go home. I wanted to quit comedy. That for me was the end of my career. But when I understood that every other comic goes through that, then I was more.
What had happened that night?
That night, I think it was just a case of, in comedy, what I try to do is protect what we call protecting your set. There's certain things that you shouldn't do as a comedian. Like, don't go on after a music act. If you're not that good, it's better to go on early so that, you're the first person that people see. If they put you on last and you know the types of comics that are there, don't try to be a hero and try to be the big person. So there's a lot of these rules that are there, and also picking your gigs very well. A lot of people will say, Carl, why don't you do skits? Why don't you do... And it's because that's a different audience. Sketch comedy and stand-up comedy are very different. I was once approached by one big brand to say, go around the country and do comedy. And I'm like, no, I'm going to fail, because if I have to perform, say, endeavours or Shona, a comedy, my jokes are not as good translated into endeavours or Shona. So that understanding as a comic and just limiting where you're going will make you even more efficient. I've literally now calculated down to a T what venues, which countries. Typical example, we listed every country that has had a leader for more than 30 years. And those are the countries that I started touring.
Wow.
Because I had an understanding and a rapport with the audience. Because when I'm now talking about, it wasn't about talking about the obvious things, but the little nuances of having a leader that's been in power for 30 years that only those countries or audiences would understand.
You talk about brands. You have I was looking at your website, tons of amazing brands that are supporting you, local, regional, and international. Do you want to speak about that?
Yeah, one of the things that I've been very fortunate about is getting a lot of support early on. And one of the things was, especially when you're looking for branding partners, is not to be greedy in the process. Are you adding value to what they're doing? Is what you're doing contextual? It's not really just about sticking a logo on what you're doing. For example, I remembered Newsday used to carry, I think it was my cooking. That's another thing. It was about diversifying portfolio. So comedy wasn't appropriate for newspapers, but cooking was, and it's something I do very well. So I would do a cooking article contribution and then pull in an advertiser to advertise below the article. So you're showing that you're useful and understanding what the other brand needs rather than thinking of your own. And I've been very fortunate that the brands that have worked with me have been very instrumental in pushing and making sure that I am seen, making sure that I'm doing the right corporate events and so on. And that has added a lot of value and credence to what I'm doing.
Does your wife believe you can cook?
Yes, apparently that's the reason why my wife married me so quick. She was like, she tasted, because I was in the friend zone for 8 years. And I did this slow roast honey chicken with garlic bread and a Greek salad. And for any guys that are watching, that's the way to get out of the friend zone, is to cook.
Right. And you've turned that Carl Can Cook into a brand or sub-brand.
Yeah.
Talk to us about that. How is it doing? Is it still going on?
Yeah, so I believe in having multiple revenue streams, but raising them like children. They all have different needs, and not all of them should fire at all cylinders. So what I did is we have the cooking, there's my graphic design, web development. I have a number of things that I do. And I notice a lot of successful people in the world, even though the books say that you must focus on the one thing, but they do handle multiple portfolios or businesses or interests. So we have an innate ability to handle a number of things. So the cooking was the second thing to, because comedy was more of a social thing. Cooking focused on the lower end of Maslow's hierarchy of needs for me. And that gave me the biggest reach. So I could cook okay, but I went into this process of training to become really good at what I do from a cooking perspective, because then I could open the doors. Most of my fans, the female constituent that actually love the cooking and then come to the comedy shows. It's such a weird thing. And then they drag their husbands to the comedy shows, who were difficult to convert, because a lot of guys, it's about ego. It's like, I don't want to be made fun of, but then the wife forces him to come to the comedy show because she's been watching the cooking. So, you know.
What do you say to husbands like me who can't cook?
I think the thing is, it's not really about the cooking. I think it's the participation. So whether it's going to be like, oh, can I wash potatoes? It usually just starts there. I've often noticed like a small gesture to my wife of washing the dishes once a year is advertised like I do it every year, every day, you know. Right. So I always think it's more about what we're trying to push as a lifestyle is how couples interact with each other. Food is definitely a place where couples definitely do interact, and it's important for them to eat together, to be part of the process of cooking together, even if the contribution is just like putting away spoons or, you know, that kind of thing.
At least you're chipping in.
Yeah, you're chipping in, but what happens is you end up growing what you can do. The more you're exposed to it, the more you're likely to think, oh, if you're the one who's picking the wine, you know, then you make a routine out of it as part of the cooking process, so that, because a lot of the times I think that's more important than actually cooking within a relationship.
Has your comedy ever gotten you into political problems? Talk to me about that.
Has it stopped? No, yeah, so it has. So my comedy, just by nature of being one of the first comics to really commercialize this art form in Zimbabwe, it was that got me into heaps of trouble immediately. I remember there's a point when we had to leave the country because every meme or every joke that was being put on WhatsApp, the CIOs thought it was, I was behind it, as though I've got a command center distributing to everyone. And I don't even have that reach. But the thing is, you would get, I think we lived in such a paranoid state that, you know, anything that you said could have been termed, you know, political. One of our strategies was always, because I was being called into offices all the time. One time I was called into some office down in a basement and asked to turn around, and some big file was put next to me. I was like, under what authority do you contact? Because I'd contacted all the embassies around the world saying I'm doing a world tour. I would like to do a courtesy call to the ambassador and perform for them for free, and then do my comedy in that country. And so the way that it was read, because this was during the government of national unity, only the MDC ambassadors responded, and all the ZANU-PF ones deferred to I think probably Ministry of what's the ministry that deals with foreign affairs? Yes. So it appeared suspicious from that perspective. But we, you know, what we learned from it, I wasn't caused any harm, but I mean, I was shaken and rattled many times because of my comedy.
But you survived.
Yes, we did.
One of my favorite jokes that you've told, which you know, speaks to where we are as a nation, where you said you believe, you were joking, that you believe that all Zimbabweans must be deported.
Right.
Out of the country, and we start from scratch, and people reapply to be citizens. What made you come up with that joke?
Yeah, I think I was speaking to the fact that I don't believe in this conversation about brain drain. I'm completely against the notion or the suggestion that those that have left the country have left a bunch of people who are inept or incapable of doing certain things. I do believe that the ones left behind have less resources in order to do a good job, and the ones that have left probably worked when resources were better. What I was just referring to there was I was trying to tell people that, listen, Zimbabweans are actually better exports as a human resource. So we should be looking at that as a revenue earner, as opposed to, it's better for us to import people from other countries to work in Zimbabwe so that we teach them how Zimbabweans are so good outside of Zimbabwe. Because clearly we have a formula of training people to be better in other countries that we haven't explored as a business. And if it's the hardships, maybe we have I call Zimbabwe the boot camp. And the boot camp, we send you out to the world. When I go to comedy shows around the world, all I have to do is show up at a comedy club. When I'm doing a comedy show in Zimbabwe, I have to do all the sponsorship proposals, I have to book the venues, I have to do some corporate gigs in order to finance the process. Then I have to do cooking shows during the day in order to get people to come, and then I have to go on stage. And that involves 10 or 20 other things. So that joke was just saying, listen, don't make fun of the fact that Zimbabweans who are back here, they're working with limited resources. The things that they are capable of doing are a miracle, to be honest. I wouldn't call it a brain drain. It's more of a brain gain that we have.
Well, what do you have to say about where we are as a nation in terms of you being a comedian? Sometimes you get a sense that there are certain jokes that us as a society cannot stomach.
Yeah.
Those in MDC would not want you to joke about certain things. Those in ZANU-PF would not want you to joke about certain things. What do you have to say about that?
Yeah, we are in a very, very terrible state as a country. And I'm not just speaking politically from one party. I think everyone across the board. We're so fractured to the extent that if I made a joke today about Emerson Mnangagwa, I'm going to be seen as an MDC supporter. Same way if I made a joke about Nelson Chamisa, I'm going to be seen as an ED sympathizer, whatever number of words they use to describe you. The challenge that's there is that people are not being progressive. There's no progressive conversations. We're not talking about global warming. We're not talking about sustainability. We're not talking about let's say, for example, we're not talking about, let's say, a housing crisis or water. We're not discussing these issues because they're always denigrating to name calling. Almost 2 seconds into it, it doesn't matter what it is that you say. And so it's a difficult thing for me as a comedian. I've actually had to cut out political humor entirely and actually not perform in Zimbabwe. So my entire comedy is now international. I'm not performing in Zimbabwe at all. And the reason being is that the audiences they're not in that state.
Wow.
Yeah, because what they want to hear, I can't deliver. I can't deliver that.
That's huge.
Yeah, and it's a big problem because I went from being censored under Robert Mugabe, now being censored by the audience.
Wow.
So, and the audience doesn't realize they're just chief culprit, to me, exactly the same.
Wow. Speak to me more about that.
Yeah.
So it means that the audience won't allow you to express yourself freely.
Yeah.
They want you to say what they want to hear.
Yes, because I realize now when you now get to a position of influence, people now have an expectation of what you should say, what you should talk about, what you should do. And whereas I know I'm now in a different space. So I'm not the same comic who was trying to climb up the ranks. I'm now being defined as what represents the industry. So what I say is very important. And so our message has turned more to a feel-good Zimbabwe type vibe. That's what we are about, is about talking about things that people should be talking about. Why aren't people doing community gardens in their neighborhoods? Why aren't they cooking with cheaper ingredients? Why aren't we traveling a lot more in our own country rather than sending the money outside? Why aren't we helping the people in the rural communities bordering the national parks to also consider building lodges out of their huts? These are the things that I want people to know using my voice for that particular purpose. If they want to argue about the political issues, that's up to them. But for me, it's more important to see how can I use my influence to better the communities I'm living in.
Wow. You, again, I'll say this, reading your biography, I looked at it and say, this guy's life is a joke. You tried to do nursing.
Yes.
You went to London to try and do nursing.
Yeah.
You didn't finish nursing.
Yes, I did.
Tell me about that.
Yeah, so, it was an agreement with my parents that I should go and have a proper profession. Because you have to remember...
Proper profession.
You have to remember the struggle that my parents were going through. At 15 or 16, myself, Kudam Sasiwa, another friend of mine, Shingim Tezo, and Jeffrey Mwamuka started a company. We were producing all the T-shirts at Prince Edward School. We had even hired a chartered accountant to come and liaise with the school to make it look like it was a proper company, he had all the stationery. So we were almost like the puppet masters running this shadow organization within the school. And we came out of there with an audacious proposal to try and get the second broadcast license in the country, and went to the Ministry of Finance and wanting to unlock whatever funding was there for youth. And let's remember, youth didn't come at 15. They didn't consider that to be youth, because youth projects are like chickens and whatever. Those are what they're told to do. But nobody's like, oh no, young people want to open a broadcasting station at 15. So my mom, I suppose, just decided that was enough. I think she wanted me to have a bit more security, sent me to England. I studied nursing. Funny enough, at the time, when we applied for our visas, they would give us visas for the 3 years that you're supposed to study nursing. Mine came back 6 months, as 6 months. And then when I applied again, they refused, and I kept appealing until the point when I'd actually finished school. All transcripts were ready, but the university wouldn't allow me to graduate because I didn't have a student visa. So
you didn't get your certificate?
Yeah, I didn't get my certificate. So I did the entire course. I did everything, but didn't graduate.
And then you lose your company in a boardroom squabble.
Yes.
Tell me about that briefly.
Yeah.
The boardroom squabble, somebody snatches your company from you.
Yeah.
You end up homeless in Botswana.
Yeah. So we started an advertising agency. It became one of the biggest ones. We were the most creative on the market. Myself and my partners, who I now get along with well, but I think we're at different points as a company. I was looking more at franchising the company. My partner was looking more at keeping our client base and keeping it safe, because economically things had taken a downturn. So a lot of decisions that we had to make there: were we bringing in another shareholder? Were they buying us out? Who was it going to be? And a lot of these issues came about. We set up a new board, and so with this myriad of discussions that are there, should we sell off some of our shares? Most of our clients were wanting to buy our agency out, and I was I'm talking 28% shareholding, and my partner was 55. I didn't have a voice in that meeting, and so in the end, I think it was better for the two of us that one of us had to leave the den.
And it was you that had to walk out.
It was me. I walked out, but yeah, I was also in a relationship at the time, about to get married, and I walked out of that at the same time. So this was happening,
Live.
Yeah.
Live.
Yeah.
And then you go to Botswana. Things happen.
Yeah, I go to Botswana to help my brother start a company. We didn't get along in a way. He was also going through a different patch. And that resulted in me being homeless in one of the instances. But when I say homeless, I didn't have a place to stay. But what we did is we found a business, like an advertising agency, and asked, you're closed between 6 and 6 the next morning. Can I come and use your office, finish off your work, and then provide security? And then when you guys come in the morning, I would have done most of your work, but I can also do my own work on the side. So it was easy for me to work from 6 to 6.
Okay.
The challenge was, what was I doing during the day? So a friend of ours from church was like, she was complaining, I can't get a maid, I can't get someone to come and clean my house. So I asked, can I come and clean your house, and I'll cook dinner for you, then you just drop me off at 6 o'clock at the other place. But my condition was that if I was allowed to take a nap for 3 hours. So I would sleep on the couch for 3 hours, and then when she comes back, then I go to my next job. So I did that for 40 days.
Wow.
Yeah.
And you wrote a book about that?
I wrote a book about that, yeah.
And that must have provided you some training for you to then go to Victoria Falls and stay in a tent. I mean, who does that, Carl?
Only a homeless guy. Only a homeless guy. The Victoria Falls thing was a wave to restart our lives. I'm 40. I don't own a house. My comedy career allows me to rent better and better, but the economy doesn't allow me to be able to put that money towards buying a house. So you can't save. And you can't. It's also volatile to put your money into forex or like buy forex. What are you going to do with it? Because you're holding cash. What are you going to do with that amount while it's just sitting and watching it? And so we had to reset. And I'm a born-again Christian, so I believe very much God is at the center of everything I do. And one of the things that God had shown me is that, listen, in the Bible, people who owned tents were considered to be wealthy. So as an act of faith, we bought 10 tents to start a camping business. And the reason why we moved into a tent was to help people to understand that you can live on holiday in a tent. If Carl and his wife can do it on a daily basis, then on holiday you can consider that.
And you did it.
Yeah.
What lessons did you get about yourself and the relationship with your wife?
Yeah. I realized at that point that I really do have an amazing person in my life. I think no other woman on the planet in their right mind would ever agree to any man saying, move from an air-conditioned house with everything to stay in a tent. So that was the first bit. And so
Crazy idea, Carl.
it's insane. I don't know. My mom cried. I think my mom was not happy about that kind of thing happening. But it's almost like, my wife and I always laugh about this. It's like God literally told us, because the minute we moved into the tent, the currency did things we never imagined it was going to do. And, people were now, stuck in a situation where they were like, I wish I had done that. And in fact, we get a lot of our visitors in Victoria Falls come just to sit around myself and my wife to understand how we knew.
So the tent is still there?
Yeah, the tent is there. Now we are working on the bus.
Wow.
And
so this is now a business?
Yeah, so we're converting the bus into a house that we will take on tour. Coming back to lessons, the one thing that I learned is that fixing a bus, because it's got no wheels, and so we've been doing a lot of work on the inside, and nothing is visible on the outside. And it felt like a metaphor of what Zimbabwe is going through right now. Because I'll tell you, traveling around the country, there's a lot of amazing things that are happening, but they haven't started showing, i.e. our bus doesn't have wheels yet. So from the outside, it's quite easy to dismiss the economy or dismiss what's happening as just, it's not working.
But there's a lot happening.
But there's a lot. I mean, we've just finished a documentary traveling around the country and just seeing a lot of, what's happening up in Kanyemba. You go down to Chiredzi, everywhere around the border towns. There's quite a lot of progress that's going on, and I feel it's probably going to drip feed into the cities at some point. But yeah.
Talk to me about another crazy idea. 2015, you and your beautiful wife, Nelsie, decide that you're going to take over a dilapidated hotel. Cotton Country Inn.
Yes.
What's that all about?
So
where is it going?
Yeah. So where my wife and I met was, she was with African Sun and I was the ad agency doing all the work for African Sun. So part of my portfolio was doing stuff like their brand manuals, standards, and so on. So the hospitality industry is something that we've always been interested in doing, especially when we were married. We decided that before we moved to Victoria Falls, we need to do some consultancy, turn around a few properties, restaurants, and so on. Our model is that we come in and I think for a period of 6 months to a year, we turn around the establishment, and either, normally we don't like to take on the property for long. So we turned around Cotton Country and it went from just having one operational room. Now it has all 10 rooms working. Currently it's still running, it's still really the hub of Kadoma at the moment.
You own it?
No, we don't. We were just No, we were running it as a management contract.
Okay.
So we no longer run Cotton Country, and it's now been run by, I think, 2 or 3 other management companies have taken it over. But it's become a more attractive sort of. And then we also did the same with Zambezi House in Victoria Falls. But what we've noticed is that we have an ability to take something that people are not regarding highly around the activities that we do, up the property value. One of the projects we're actually doing is in South Africa, where there's a building that has just been bought from auction, and we're doing a festival in there, and then hopefully what it does is that it ups the value of that particular property, because people can see it in use and they can see what they can do with it. But this is all in terms of trying to get our financial literacy in check. There's a lot of things that we don't understand yet, so we don't want to jump in and say we're going to take over something we're going to run for life when we don't understand the nitty-gritties of working with people and understanding how money works within those particular aspects.
You say you are a born-again Christian. What role does faith and God play in your life?
Wow, it's everything.
Talk to me about that.
I mean, you know, God, you have to remember that at some point when I was coming back from England, you know, I decided to try and kill myself twice, you know, and the only reason I'm alive today is because I took paracetamol, and, you know, all I did was just throw up on the floor. But that moment was an awakening where God showed me that the things that I was willing to kill myself over were nothing compared to the things I would encounter later. And God began to teach me a lot of things that, for me, I believe when things are not working is when I'm the closest to God. When I was homeless, God was telling me that, you see, Carl, the reason why I brought you here is because I want you to feel what it's like for your spirit to hover over the face of the deep, to be dark and void. And I want you to call things into existence. You are going to look at, that's why I look at opportunity and I say I look at problems and I say this is a big opportunity. Because I can walk into a dark place and say, let there be light. Because I'm created in his image. And we're created to create. So if we're not creating, then we're not created in his image. God creates variety, creates a lot of things. And that's what I'm here to do as well. That's my mandate. And so faith is at the base of it. So a lot of the times we're doing a world tour. We'll write all the dates, all the clubs we want to perform in, before we've even called them.
Pray about it.
Yeah, and literally that's what we do. We pray our business plan to God. We don't pray, you know, give me this. We like literally read the business plan out to God and say, this is what we've decided to do, and God aligns everything.
That's great faith.
He does. He's amazing in the sense that God has just told me faith is do 5 things to show me that you believe what you're doing. And I'll give you a typical example. When things got very hard for us politically here in Zimbabwe, we said we couldn't live in Zimbabwe until this situation had been sorted. And we literally moved from Kadoma. We didn't have money. I want you to remember this. We didn't have money. We took the bus from Kadoma, got to Harare, and then we collected a card from Stewart Bank, which was supposed to be like an international debit card. We went to the airport and sat in the departure lounge, in the departures, without a ticket, with our bags, having posted online to say that we're going on a world tour. And 30 minutes before check-in desk closes, money pops into the card, ticket is bought, we're on a plane, we traveled a year.
Wow.
And all of it was, there was no money to do it. And yeah.
Tell me, are you at liberty to share why you wanted to kill yourself?
Right. Yeah, sure. So the issue with the university, with me not having to come back home, my parents had said, listen, come back home, it's going to be okay. I just felt like, you know, I was a failure. I'm the firstborn in the family. You know, I've been married before, so you know, my wife at the time had also just left, and so a lot of things, you know, were really bad at the time. I locked myself up in the room. I remembered listening to Alvin Slaughter. I think it was his album God Can, and I just watched this on repeat. And then I just decided, you know, it was enough. I should end this, and went into the bathroom, just picked a cabinet that had, because we shared with a whole bunch of other people. I just drank these tablets, and then I woke up, nothing had happened, and then I tried again, and then I just threw up, and then I went back into the room, and then that's when that moment happened, you know.
Do you have a message for people who've tried to commit suicide, people who are thinking of committing suicide?
Yeah, I think what it is that, you know, everyone has their struggle and they get to their point, but what people have to remember is that there's only 2 things that are not in your control. Who's born and who dies. Everything else in between is in your control. It's in your control to not accelerate certain processes, but ultimately it's God who's going to decide if that's going to happen. But I think what you must always remember is that you are in control of everything else. So even if you have a landlord who's knocking on your door and you don't have the money, it's better to open the door and play out the worst case scenario. Tell the landlord you don't have the money. Play it out, because for me, I've played out worst case scenarios all the time. And the worst case scenarios are not as bad as I thought they were. Living in a tent, being homeless, you know, losing a company. All those worst case scenarios are not, they don't faze me anymore.
Wow. 2020 seems to be very exciting. I was looking at your calendar. it's mouth-watering, and I was tempted to press a book, and because you're going to be in South Asia, you're going to be in Australia, you're going to be in Europe, the UK, you're going to be in Southern Africa. You're thinking of launching some television channels. Talk to me about that. I mean, that's exciting stuff.
Yeah. So this year we decided we don't want to do what we can. We want to do what we want. So if I want something, then I'm doing it. I'm not waiting for the variables to be there for me. If I want it, if I say that's what I want, like this year I wanted to move Valentine's Day, and I moved it successfully.
To where?
Yeah, to April, because
why April?
April, because I bought my wife tickets to watch Boys to Men. So she took me off.
Wow.
She took me off the. And what's funny is that we said at the beginning of the year we want to watch Boys to Men this year, and we thought we'd have to do it in Vegas, and then Boys to Men are in South Africa, and so everything we've said we've wanted to do. When we're talking about channels, I'm talking about content. I don't know if you're aware of this. The world does not have a TV channel with African food. Like there's no TV channel in the world with African food. You have African movies, you have African music, but you've got no African food. We have to wait for Jamie Oliver to cook jollof rice for us to understand how to cook food from our own continent. We're suffering a very great cultural sort of appropriation that's going on. And if we don't address it, and I'm only starting the conversation, so when I'm saying that we'll need to start these television stations, they need to happen as a matter of urgency, because we don't have a travel channel. This is the reason why BBC can get away with saying Victoria Falls is dry, because we are not talking about it. We have no channel. All the tourism boards in Africa combined have not thought to themselves, we need one voice, even if it's a pop-up channel on DSTV. And so we've been sort of researching and looking at the play-out services and like how do we get channels onto satellite. My objective is to either create or curate 5,200 hours of content structured in those particular channels. At our festival is to present to potential investors and say, this is the need, here's the content. We've done the groundwork, now what we need is the action to make it happen.
Fantastic. That sounds very exciting, Carl. We wish you all the best with those projects. What books are you reading? What book have you read that has made a huge impact on you, Carl?
Right. I don't know if I'm allowed to say the word, but
everything. This show, we say whatever we want.
Yeah. There's a lot of fucks in the books. The subtle art of not giving a fuck. There's another one.
That's the title of the book.
Exactly.
Just share.
Yeah. So I like that because this is the phase that we're in. Although the author sort of is going through the process of learning that, but I think we've already been doing it for a while. I've been revisiting Good to Great by Jim Collins and also Purpose-Driven Life by Rick Warren, because that was the basis of my 40-day. So I've sort of been going back to what inspired where I've been coming from. But those would be and then recently I've been reading my own book. So I know it's bad, but it's proofreading. It's got lots of mistakes.
Let's talk about that book. Let's talk about that book, because I looked at it, the chapters there about how to start a business, how to write a plan, what not to do, and so forth. Speak to us about that.
Yeah, so I was very interested in, I write a lot of articles using a number of pseudonyms for different publications, mostly business related. And I compiled a number of them into a book. And I was particularly looking at things that Zimbabweans could do in their current situations, things that would, working with your spouse, or how to write a business plan that you actually use. Because people write business plans for banks, but never refer to them. They usually pull them up for me and they say, I've got this business plan. But like a business plan should be like your Bible. It's the thing you read every day. Like to say verse 1, chapter 2, this is what a business plan is supposed to be. Or setting resolutions. I think people have a terrible way of setting goals, which is to set them on the 1st of January, for example. Whereas your New Year is your birthday. You can do that in an uncluttered space and you're not influenced by other people. And also making people understand that things do not happen in 365-day cycles. So some things happen in 5 years, some things happen in 2 months, some things happen in 2 days. So people need to understand the relationship between moments, seasons, that kind of thing. So that's what that book sort of speaks to and connects people to how I approach things.
What's the book called? Is it in print or it's digital format only?
Yeah, so it's in digital format and it's also an audio book. So it's motivational articles by Carl Joshua Ncube.
Okay.
Yeah, so it's just a compilation of those.
Fantastic. What message would you have for young people begging to get into business, who are facing all manner of challenges? What message would you have for them?
Yeah. Firstly, I'll speak to kids that are in school, in institutions of learning. Understand that you're already pre-invested when you're in school. So don't think about, when I leave school, this is what I'm going to do. So you're already pre-invested. Facilities are there. You even have the sympathy of a market. So anything that's being produced in the school, I would suggest do it now at this point. Institutions of learning like universities, find out where the grants are. Find out how to get financing of the projects that you're doing. Make sure every article, project that you're doing is related to what you want to achieve. And then outside of that circle, I think Zimbabweans need to look back and I think take inspiration from the rural lifestyle. I think people underestimate owning land, being able to grow your own food, having wealth, wealth you can demonstrate, not having a flashy car or whatever, but the 5 goats and the 10 cows. I would suggest invest in that. I would suggest traveling to those areas. So even if it's like domestic tourism, convert a few huts in your village into Airbnbs. You know, when you bring them together, trust me, people would rather pay $50 to $100 to stay in an authentic hut. So start looking at things that are not traditional in order to make revenues, I would say.
That's sound advice. Carl, thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
You have such a busy schedule with tours all over the world, and for you finding time to join us, we're very grateful. We wish you the best for the busy 2020, and that your book sells as many copies as possible and makes you rich. Thank you so much for coming. Let me turn to our audience in the diaspora at home. Thank you for watching In Conversation with Trevor. I invite you to subscribe. There's a little subscribe button. Press on that subscribe button so that you receive notification every time we have a new program. In Conversation with Trevor is a weekly show. Don't miss out on these quality conversations. Thank you for watching. See you next time.